Pastor Carl Gallups is a former law enforcement officer, a senior pastor, and a prolific author. The latest book, Be Thou Prepared, Equipping the Church for Persecution in Times of Trouble. It's actually already upon us, as we saw what took place in Oregon, where people were asked their faith and the Christians were shot in the head. I want to get into that and also the topic of preparedness from a faith perspective. Pastor Carl Gallups, welcome back to the Schilling Show.
Rob, it's always an honor to be with you. Thanks for having me on today.
Terrific. And by the way, I just want to let people know we'll have a copy of the book, Be Thou Prepared, for a lucky listener coming up a little bit later on in the program. I want people to stay tuned. Let's talk about the question of preparation. There's a very interesting vignette that starts your book here in the introduction to the book, or the foreword of the book, where a person who was in a church in South Africa was present and armed when invaders came into the church. It was a horrifying situation. Would you tell us what happened?
Yeah, Charles Van Wyck is the one who wrote the foreword to the book. You're right. And in fact, later on in my book, I go into even more detail of his harrowing experience. But the deal is, he had spent time in law enforcement in South Africa and was licensed to carry a concealed weapon. He was a member of a very large church. I think they ran over 1,000 in worship in their congregation, and he was one of the few, if not the only, people in his church that carried a concealed weapon. Now, it's my understanding that in South Africa it's very difficult to get one of those permits, but he had one. He also relates in his book how people within his church who knew that he carried often, lightly chastised him or made fun of him for it, and, you just need to have faith. What are you doing? Why would you bring a gun to church? And all of those kinds of things that, people have questions about those. So he was subject to all of that. Well, as it turned out, his worst nightmare scenario and the church's worst nightmare scenario actually did come to fruition. And several years ago, while he was in a worship service with over 1,000 people in attendance, the church was breached by terrorists who had pulled up in an automobile out front. Several stayed with the automobile. They had grenades. They had automatic assault rifles, and a couple of them came bursting into the sanctuary in the middle of the worship service, lobbed a grenade into the worship service, killed, I can't remember how many, I don't have my book in front of me, but killed a double handful at least immediately, wounded many others, a nasty, grisly scene from a hand grenade, and I don't want to be too graphic here, but body parts everywhere. It was terrible. And then, of course, the terrorists, thinking they were in a completely gun-free zone, and that's the key, Rob,
Yes.
That's what happened at UCC, that's what happened in North Carolina in the church, but they, thinking they're in a gun-free zone, they go up and they begin to shoot. Well, Charles Van Wyck, he was prepared. He was prepared, which is one of the themes of my new book. Now, there's a context to it, but anyway, he dropped down to one knee, pulled his revolver. He had a revolver. I think it was a .357, and he had 6 shots. And it's interesting because he says in his book, and I relate it in my book, that the only thing he kept thinking was, why don't I have more ammunition? In other words, he had put his gun in his holster and had it under his jacket, but he had 6 shots. That was it. But as it turned out, this shows you the cowardice of most of these attackers, these Christian massacrists. He fired a couple of shots at the terrorist. I don't know that he hit one there, but the terrorists immediately were freaking out. They just were not expecting return gunfire. They fled from the sanctuary. They were intending on killing everybody there. They found out later when they finally arrested some of the guys, and they admitted they were going to massacre all 1,000 of the people in that church.
Wow.
But he fired. The guy ran to the door. Charles Van Wyck chased him. The guys ran out to the car. He went out and emptied the rest of his pistol at the terrorist and the car as it was fleeing. To the best of my memory, he actually hit one of the terrorists and I don't think it killed him, but it injured him very, very badly. They were eventually able to capture several of them, arrest them, make some arrests. But Charles Van Wyck is hailed as the hero of that whole event. He saved, 900 and something lives because the terrorists admitted that they were going to kill every one of them. They were going to bar the doors and mow them all down. So it was tragic, the number of people who did die in that mass shooting, in that massacre, aimed and targeted specifically at Christians, but and he wrote a book about it. It's called Shooting Back, The Right and Duty of Self-Defense. He has spoken to that on TV and radio all over the world, and he's a missionary now. He's a pastor, a minister, a great and godly man, a good friend of mine. He wrote the foreword to the book, and as I said, more details about that story, that harrowing story, are in my book.
We're talking with Pastor Carl Gallups. Let's go to the phones and say hello to Larry. Larry, welcome to the Schilling Show. Comment or question, please, for Pastor Gallups.
Yes, sir. I have a question for Pastor Gallups. I have even heard some people talk about the fact that even in places of employment, one person made a comment one time, we've really got to be careful about hiring certain individuals, and a gentleman told me that this was directed towards hiring people of the Christian faith. So I think your book is very appropriate, but I think the seeds that have been planted probably 20 years ago are now turning into vines and trees of this anti-Christian bigotry.
Larry, first of all, thanks for listening to the Schilling Show, and God bless you for calling in. Listen, you've raised an extremely important issue, one which I address in my book. I talk about this lengthy process of marginalization of Christians. It's been going on for decades. Hollywood, the media, we've been marginalized, lampooned, lambasted, made fun of, violated, trashed, and that's the same thing that happened in Hitler's Third Reich. I mean, with Jews and people undesirables, they began to marginalize them, make fun of them, lambaste them, lampoon them, make them less than human beings, until finally he had the whole population basically hating them. Then he was able to pull off his Holocaust. The same kind of thing, many people fear, it has been happening in the United States, largely at the hands of Hollywood and the media, and, of course, various governmental institutions and governmental leaders. And so now, as you're saying, Larry, a lot of that is reaching its fruition. The little seeds that have been planted are turning into vines and trees. That's an excellent illustration. And so, yes, that's one of the things my book addresses. I'm trying to wake up the church and wake up Christians as to what is happening. We don't need to be walking around with our head in the air and the clouds, or either buried in the sand. And my book isn't all about guns and whether Christians should carry guns and what did Jesus say about that and what does the Bible say about that. I answer all of that. But it's also about everyday preparedness, everything. I mean, from dealing with natural disasters to direct attacks, persecution, times of trouble, everything. And it just explains to churches and Christians how to prepare. But it's not a radical prepper book. I'm a father, a grandfather. I'm a former police officer, deputy sheriff in 2 different sheriff's offices. I'm 30 years in the ministry, 29 years as pastor of one church, good, solid, evangelical, conservative church. I'm not a hand-wringer. I'm not a date setter. And I just say, look, we can see the prophetic times in which we're living. We are absolutely foolish and being biblically disobedient if we don't prepare and teach our people to prepare, not only to take care of ourselves, but also so that in times of trouble, we can minister the love of Jesus Christ to others who weren't prepared. Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, Larry, I've got about 30 seconds for a quick follow-up, then I got to go to the break.
Yes, sir. I'm glad he's mentioned that. And, you're even starting to see a marginalization like in certain music forms of Christian performers. For instance, in the country music, I've noticed that some of you people who are born-again Christians are releasing pro-family music. They've been kind of put to the wayside. So I think it's very all-encompassing, this anti-Christian bigotry.
Yes, it is, and my book addresses that in great detail. Thank you for bringing that up, Larry.
All right, let's go to the break here. We come back on the other side, our final segment with Pastor Carl Gallups. The book is Be Thou Prepared, Equipping the Church for Persecution in Times of Trouble. By the way, right now to caller number 5 at 977-1070, I have a free copy of this book. Ian stands by. It's 434-977-1070. It's a terrific resource for you, and it is a very provocative read because you need to think about these things before the time of persecution and times of trouble come upon us. Right now, caller number 5, 977-1070. I have a free copy of Pastor Carl Gallups' book, Be Thou Prepared. We come back on the other side, and we will pick this conversation up. I want to talk about the rise of Islam and Sharia in America and what that means for Christians today. Stay tuned. The Schilling Show is back in just a moment with Pastor Carl Gallups. Final segment of the Schilling Show for today. Pastor Carl Gallups is our guest. The book is Be Thou Prepared. I want to talk about the rise of Islam and Sharia in America, and particularly in light of the fact that we seem to be having the federal government bringing more and more people in who have a point of view that's antithetical to the United States Constitution. Pastor Gallups?
Yes. Well, Rob, this is a very complex topic, and I surely wished we had more time. So I'm going to give my brief answer, and listeners who know much more about this, please just be patient with me on that. Again, my book addresses this factor as well. I'm telling you, this book is pretty eclectic. Everything from how to store food and water to Islam and Sharia and, gun ownership and church security and obeying the government or disobeying the government, all the questions that Christians ask. From 40 years of my experience in law enforcement and ministry, people ask. So this is part of it. Well, the thing is, Rob, look, like any faith system, you have very strict adherents. And then you have people who are just nominal. I've talked to many. I do a lot of traveling around the United States, and I've been in and out of businesses and taxi cabs and other places. And, I speak to people about their faith. And whenever I encounter a Muslim, I ask them, do you go to mosque? Do you use a prayer rug, et cetera? Just fine. And it's amazing the number in America, and they don't even know who I am. So, but so many that I've talked to said, well, no, I'm just, I'm an immigrant here. I'm from Pakistan or wherever. We're not, that faithful, et cetera, et cetera. Those kinds of Muslims, I have discovered, love America and everything about it. The Constitution, the freedoms, the advantages for their family, the style of life. They love it. So I understand that. And immigrants, certainly legal immigrants, in my mind, are welcome here. Our nation was built on such. But the problem, Rob, as we all know, and as we're finding out the hard way, is that many Muslims are adherents to Islam. Now, they may not be the radical where they're going to strap a bomb on themselves, but the Quran itself, I've read it from cover to cover, and they have studied it. And I'm telling you, it calls for jihad against infidels, against unbelievers in many different ways. Christians and Jews are the targets of the Quran. And so people who do go to mosque, people who do read the Quran, people who are adherents to the faith, it is incompatible with the culture of the United States of America and a constitutional republic. Sharia law, which is called for in the Quran and in Islam, and is extremely, it's the antithesis of a constitutional republic. And I don't know what these liberals are thinking who are coddling up to this radical Islam, and they want it in the United States, it seems. I mean, these are the same people that want open homosexuality and gay marriage, but it's the radical Islamists that are throwing homosexuals off of buildings and killing them and executing them and hanging them in public hangings. And their barbarism and their mistreatment of women and children, it's horrific. It's back in the Middle Ages. But yet it seems this dichotomy, this hypocrisy of the leftists of America that are intent on importing these kinds of Muslims into our nation, spreading them around the nation, and integrating them into our society. And when they do, they begin demanding their, quote, rights, and they begin demanding that Sharia law be a part of their culture. So yeah, this is a huge cultural problem. I see it as being very prophetic, actually. This is why I say I wished we had another hour to speak, Rob. But I address this in my book, and it's just another thing that I'm trying to wake up pastors and Christians and churches to. And my book outlines, Rob, what is it called? A poll by George Barna that was taken by thousands and thousands of conservative pastors across America who admitted that they never address these things in their pulpit. They never address them because they're afraid they'll lose members. And it's just amazing. We have the vast majority of American Christians do not know the things that you and I are talking about and that my book addresses, which is why I think the book is just so important. People have to get this book. It addresses every question they have, including the Islamic Sharia issue.
Pastor Carl Gallups, we've got about a minute left. Let's first of all tell people where they can get a copy of your book.
Thank you. You can get it anywhere good books are sold. It's published by WND Books, major publisher. But Amazon's the quickest, easiest place for people who shop online. Just put my name in Amazon, Carl Gallups, and my page will come up, all 4 of my books. If you can remember the title, it's Be Thou Prepared. Of course, any place good books are sold. And you can, if you forget all of that, just go to my website, carlgallups.com, carlgallups.com, and there's a link there to everything about me, all of my programming and videos and books and my ministry, the church that I pastor, everything is right there.
I'm looking forward always to our next conversation because there's so much more we couldn't touch on today. Pastor Carl Gallups, thank you so much for being a guest here today on The Schilling Show.
It's my honor, Rob. Thank you for having me. I'd be glad to come back anytime. God bless you.
God bless. And we will do it again, and we'll be back here tomorrow.